Close your eyes for a moment and imagine an entire country built but left uninhabited. Skylines of glass towers without people, highways that lead to nowhere, apartment complexes with lights that will never be turned on. Now multiply that vision by 80 million. That's the number of empty homes in China, enough housing for the entire population of Germany. But here's the terrifying truth. These ghost cities of China are not the disease. They are only the symptom of something far more dangerous, a structural collapse of the Chinese economy that is beginning to reshape the entire world order. The numbers are staggering. $3 trillion in hidden local government debt, millions of people disappearing from the population every single year, youth unemployment surging past 17%, banks drowning in bad loans that make the 2008 financial crisis look manageable. What is happening in China is not a normal recession. It is not even a financial crisis in the traditional sense. This is the unraveling of the very economic model that powered China's rise for 4 decades, the same model that transformed the country into the world's second-largest economy and the beating heart of global manufacturing. And here's the problem. The West is completely unprepared for what comes next. For 40 years, China's economic rise seemed unstoppable. Year after year, the country delivered double-digit GDP growth. Farmland gave way to gleaming megacities. China became the factory of the world, pulling in supply chains from Western corporations, providing cheap labor, and driving the dreams of emerging markets that tied their futures to Chinese demand. Many believed the 21st century would belong to Beijing. That belief turned into an assumption, then into dogma. But beneath the surface of China's economic miracle, cracks were forming. Those cracks are now gaping fissures threatening not only China's future, but also the stability of global markets. At the core of the collapse is one sector that once defined China's wealth: real estate. The property industry alone drove nearly 30% of China's GDP directly and indirectly. Developers like Evergrande, Country Garden, and China South City became symbols of unstoppable growth until they weren't. Evergrande's $300 billion in liabilities was the first domino to fall. Then Country Garden, then state-backed giants. Today, even government-supported developers are buckling under the weight of impossible debt. Factor 1. The property implosion. To understand the collapse of China's property sector, consider this. Up to 80 million empty homes sit across the country, unfilled and often unfinished. He Keng, a former deputy head of China's National Bureau of Statistics, admitted openly that China's 1.4 billion citizens could not fill them all, even if every single person moved in. These aren't just houses. They represent millions of shattered dreams. Evergrande alone left behind 800,000 pre-sold but unfinished apartments, homes that Chinese families had already paid for but will never receive. Cities built for millions now stand silent, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The property collapse doesn't just take down developers, it destroys confidence. For decades, Chinese families believed property prices only went one way, up. With 70% of household wealth tied to real estate, that belief was a kind of social contract. Now it's broken. The psychological blow is devastating. Consumer confidence has evaporated, and without it, China cannot shift into a consumption-driven economy like the United States or Europe. Factor 2. The debt bomb. Behind the ghost cities lies an even greater threat: China's debt mountain. By the end of 2024, China's total debt had surged to 303% of GDP. And here's the most alarming statistic. It now takes 5.5 units of new debt to create just 1 unit of GDP growth. Local governments are the most vulnerable link in this chain. Through local government financing vehicles, LGFVs, they borrowed trillions, somewhere between $7 to $11 trillion in hidden debt, using land as collateral. But with land sales collapsing, these financing tools are now essentially insolvent. In fact, 12 out of 31 provinces are spending more than 100% of their monthly fiscal income just to service debt. On top of that, China's shadow banking system, wealth management products, trust products, and high-return schemes operates like a massive Ponzi scheme. For years, it depended on constant new investment to pay off maturing products. But when groups like Zhongji Enterprise Group and Sichuan Trust collapsed in 2024, the contagion began spreading. The conclusion is simple. China cannot grow its way out of this debt trap. The math does not work. Factor 3. The demographic collapse. Debt and property collapse are terrifying enough. But China faces a deeper, slower, and irreversible crisis: demographics. In 2024, China's population fell by 1.39 million people, the third consecutive year of decline. The birth rate dropped to 6.77 per thousand, and the fertility rate is stuck between 1.0 and 1.2 children per woman, far below the replacement level of 2.1. The country is aging faster than Japan during its demographic decline, but unlike Japan, China is far poorer. By 2024, 22% of the population was over 60 years old, while the working-age population shrank to just 858 million. By mid-century, this demographic crisis alone will cut GDP growth by at least 1 percentage point every year. The real ticking time bomb is the pension system. A government report in 2019 already warned that China's main pension fund will be depleted by 2035. Fewer workers, more retirees, and a shrinking tax base. This is a fiscal nightmare. Beijing faces an impossible choice: default on pensions, crush the younger generation with higher taxes, or slide into fiscal collapse. Factor 4. Global decoupling. For decades, China's economy relied on exports. Factories churned out everything from smartphones to solar panels. The world consumed and China thrived, but that model is crumbling. In the first half of 2025, Chinese exports to the United States fell by 10.7%. The European Union has imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Emerging markets are turning to other suppliers. Mexico has overtaken China as America's top trading partner. De-risking isn't just a buzzword anymore. It is a structural rewiring of global supply chains, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. The very markets China needs for survival are closing their doors. The managed decline. So where does this leave Beijing? Instead of solving the crisis, China's government is containing it. In 2024 and 2025, stimulus measures, rate cuts, deficit targets, liquidity injections were rolled out, but they were too small and misdirected. Money kept flowing into manufacturing and semiconductors, not into consumer demand, which remains at just 40% of GDP compared to 70% in the US. This extend and pretend strategy is eerily similar to Japan's lost decades. But China is starting from a much weaker position: lower income levels, far worse demographics, and collapsing confidence. The result is likely decades of managed stagnation, where China avoids sudden collapse but never regains the unstoppable growth of the past. What it means for the world, for global markets, this is more than just an economic story. It's a geopolitical earthquake. A stagnating China is not a safer China. It may be a more dangerous China. When economic power declines, leaders may turn to nationalism and aggression abroad. Analysts warn that Beijing could accelerate its ambitions on Taiwan before its relative power declines further. For the West, China's collapse means higher inflation as supply chains reorganize, the loss of the world's largest consumer market for growth, and a far more unstable global environment. The dream that economic integration would moderate China's behavior is over. Instead, we are entering an era of parallel economic systems, technological decoupling, and rising conflict risks, the blueprint for the future. The data is clear. China's collapse is not coming. It's already here. 80 million empty homes stand as monuments to a broken property model. 303% debt to GDP makes growth mathematically impossible. A shrinking, aging population locks the country into long-term decline. Global decoupling cuts off the very lifeline of exports that once fueled growth. Beijing can manage the decline, but it cannot prevent it. And for the rest of the world, the message is clear. Prepare for a future where China is no longer the engine of growth, but instead a source of deflation, instability, and strategic uncertainty. The story of China's rise was the story of the late 20th and early 21st century, but the story of its decline may define the century ahead. For investors, policymakers, and citizens alike, the question is not if, but how you will adapt to a world reshaped by the collapse of the Chinese economy.